Hey everyone, I'm Marie Macheres. Welcome back to Make Me Smart, where we make today make sense.
And I'm Kimberly Adams. Thank you for joining us for our weekly Friday happy hour, Economics on Tap. It is Friday. It is July the 11th. And so whether you are joining the YouTube live stream or listening to the podcast later on, thank you for joining us. And we hope that you are able to wind down for the week because it's just nonstop. It's nonstop.
It's too much. So today we're going to do the drinks, or rather we're going to do some news and then play a game. But first, let's talk about the drinks. What are you drinking?
Well, as I was just telling you before the show, I had like an epic struggle trying to open this bottle of like sparkling blackberry water that I was going to use for my cocktail, and I literally could not get it open. So instead, I had this bottle of like concentrated berry black tea that I just mixed with water, and then I added bourbon to it. But I've got it in our 25-year anniversary marketplace glass for the throwbacks who might have that gift from back in the day. What do you have?
And you're in the DC Bureau, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice.
Yes, I'm sorry, no R-Tax today. You have to bring Sim on to compensate.
Will make an appearance.
Yes.
Who knows? I had big ambitions myself. I was going to make something from my garden, or like try to experiment and make a concoction of sorts. But I am feeling under the weather, so I'm a little boring. I'm just drinking water with electrolytes to try to,
you know what,
hydrate.
You got to do it sometimes.
Yeah,
bounce back. I'm glad that you're feeling a little bit better. Hopefully, you get to rest up this weekend.
I'm gonna definitely get a lot of sleep this weekend.
Good. All right, let's see. I'm seeing that now there's rankings for people in the YouTube chat, which feels like a new thing. So Margie, who's number 1, has Truly Black Cherry Lemonade. Debbie at number 2 is sad about Artex not joining us and having thoughts. Let's see. What else is everybody drinking? Denim Wizard is also drinking Pepsi. Water.
Oh, coconut water. Yeah, that is a good way to get electrolytes. Might walk over to the co-op and get some later.
I was feeling sick a couple of days ago, and I went and got some coconut water, and it did kind of make me feel a little bit better. Let's see. Sarah has milk and cookies. Love it. Daniel has Jack Daniel's Southern Citrus with a couple of olives in it. That's fascinating. I have not heard of that combo before. Okay. Oh, and then Matthew's having the brandy old fashioned here in Milwaukee. We did a whole like thing about the brandy old fashioned. I guess it was like 2 years ago or something like that. Anyway, let's get on to some news. What do you have, Rima?
All right. What am I talking about today? So, in the headlines, you may have probably seen that the State Department fired more than 1,300 employees via email today, which is all part of the administration's plans headed by Rubio to downsize the government to get rid of quote unquote bloat. And this is coming a couple days after the Supreme Court overturned a lower court order that had blocked the Trump administration from doing mass layoffs. And I want to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But just to go over the State Department news. So the department's workforce of about 18,000 is being reduced by about 15%. It's targeting a lot of offices with human rights, democracy, refugees, war crimes. It's not supposed to touch overseas staffing, but I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets impacted at some point. Democrats in Congress are pretty furious about this, of course, especially as we're dealing with all these global crises. There's this fear that it'll shrink our diplomatic expertise. And, this purge in a lot of ways is not surprising for multiple reasons. But back in 2017, the Trump administration made cuts to the State Department, brought in outsiders to reshape it. And so this time it's obviously a lot more intense. And, like we've talked about on this show, a lot of it points back to this general playbook or pattern of valuing things like ideology over expertise or loyalty over experience. But I want to talk for a second about the Supreme Court decision. So, like I said, it basically gave the administration a green light to do layoffs in multiple agencies. But the question of whether the layoffs are illegal is still an open question, because essentially what happened is that after Trump issued an executive order in February calling for mass layoffs, it brought, of course, all these legal challenges from labor unions, nonprofits, from local governments, and they essentially argued that the president couldn't make big changes to federal agencies without congressional approval. And then a federal district court judge found that the executive branch had likely overstepped, and they put a pause on the layoffs. But then, of course, the Supreme Court overturned that. So, if courts eventually decide that the layoffs were illegal, those federal workers could be entitled to back pay and possibly get their jobs back. But, these cases take forever. And so, who knows? I think even when the cases are, even when they've concluded, I think, who knows, the restructuring could be complete or their jobs might not even be a thing anymore.
Or they may not want the jobs anymore. They may have
Or they may not
moved
want
on to
that's
something
they've
else.
moved on. Well, so many
And
people have already moved on. They've done buyouts, and that's like a lot of the agencies have already, they're not going to cut anymore because of that reason.
hmm
So,
and they're trying, and some agencies are trying to hire people back and trying to track them down. But what a way to, treat your workforce. One
yeah.
thing
And
I was thinking
mm,
about with these State Department layoffs in particular, a lot of them are these Foreign Service officers who are based here in DC, right?
mhm.
And yes, I get it. It's like we don't need diplomats here in the United States, I'm guessing is the argument. But a lot of times these are people who are in between rotations or who are training to go on a rotation. And one of the perks of having a robust foreign service workforce is usually these folks don't stay ambassadors, foreign service officers all the time. But what they do is they spend a couple years working at an embassy, using their language skills, building up their language skills, and then they come back and they work in other places in government or in business or in, industry and bring that expertise of having lived and worked somewhere else and understanding how the US federal government interacts with these foreign countries, and they bring that expertise into all of these other areas of the
Mhm.
functioning of government. And the whole soft power thing is a big deal. We're creating a space for China to move into the space, but also just eviscerating this layer of expertise that's kind of operating
Yeah.
in the background throughout the federal government. That's going to have real lasting ripple effects.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking about that, the loss of institutional knowledge. And going back to what you were saying, I was, reading up on this morning, and there were so many quotes in a lot of these reports of, like you said, people who are just tired and maybe who took buyouts, but also there's some amount of relief at the fact that there's just clarity. It reminds me
Mm-hmm.
of earlier this year, I was talking with a few federal workers for the show that I host. This is Uncomfortable. And there was this one guy I talked to who works at a national park. And what really stuck with me and honestly kind of surprised me was that he said that the lowest point wasn't when he lost his job, it was when he returned because of
Mm.
when the pauses were lifted. Because suddenly he was expected to just like pick things up and keep going like nothing had happened, even though everything had changed, right? And he like described it as feeling like he was going back to a toxic ex because the trust was gone. He couldn't plan long term. He didn't feel valued, and there was this like constant sense of being at the mercy of political whims, which I think
Mm.
really captures the emotional toll here. And yeah, I think when you read some of the reporting about the State Department, like I said, there are a lot of people who just are they're like, okay, well, for a long time, every email I got, every morning I woke up, I felt this sense of dread of whether or not this was going to be my last day, and
Mm.
at least I can move on now. But there's just a lot of implications here.
Yeah, and your point about the shifting of what is valued kind of ties into my news item, which is sort of an amalgamation of a bunch of things that I've been seeing this week. So I had a story on the PM show tonight about the Medicaid cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and how they're going to show up potentially for people who rely on home health care and community based health care, which is at higher risk, according to the experts I talked to, of being cut. And, this is going to have major impacts on families with with children with disabilities, adults who are disabled and trying to live independently, seniors who want to age in place. All of these things matter. But then I saw this email from a, a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, which is this libertarian think tank that has a lot of really smart economists who I talk to on a regular basis. And the headline is What the Media Gets Wrong About the Medicaid Cuts. And he rightfully points out that a lot of these cuts come from a variety of places that actually have quite a bit of public support. So, for example,
Mm,
of the $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, 167 billion is coming from a 10-year delay of two Joe Biden rules that were finalized in 2023 and haven't taken effect, right? And this is
mm,
aimed at making re-enrollment procedures more permissive for different groups. It's a stretch to characterize that as a cut, spending increases that have not occurred, especially when these increases come from the prevention of states identifying people who are no longer eligible for the program. If you ask folks, hey, shouldn't we make sure that the only people on Medicaid are the people who should be on Medicaid? Most people are going to say yes, right? And then
Right.
the other thing is these provider taxes, which we've talked about a little bit on here.
Mm-hmm.
It's super complicated, but this, they're calling it fake accounting. This was just a way for
Right.
states to potentially game the system, but they were using the system that they had. And, it said so he says, while this may indeed lead to reductions in Medicaid spending, describing it as a cut obscures reality. With this provision, neither the federal matching formula is changing nor forbidding the use of provider taxes as a source of fund. There's no limit to the taxes. And he goes on to list all these other components of the Medicaid cuts that actually do have support or reasonable economic arguments behind them. But what it kind of makes me think about is the broader shifting of who is entitled to services in our country. And I feel like in the past, it's been more of a sense of like, okay, some people who maybe shouldn't get the benefits are going to slip in there, but in the interest of getting the most people care as possible, let's go ahead and spend the money anyway. And there's a drastic shift happening in the opposite direction where it's like, no, we would rather kind of allow some people to fall through the cracks and hopefully catch them
Right.
than overspend on these programs. And this was echoed with the press release that came out of the White House yesterday. And White House's language, not mine, taxpayer funded benefits are for American citizens, not
Mm-hmm.
illegals. And it goes through all of these different changes throughout different agencies: Department of Human Health and Human Services, Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Labor, and all of the changes that they're making to ensure that undocumented immigrants are not getting these benefits. Again, a space where in the past it's like, well, we are better off as a country if we capture everybody poor and vulnerable, even if maybe
Mm-hmm.
they aren't technically citizens. And it's just a shift. It's a big
Yeah.
shift. And then an AP story that Head Start is going to be cut off for immigrants without legal status. They're not going to be able to enroll their kids in this early childhood education program. And so I do think it's worth noting this fundamental realignment of the federal government's assessment of who should get benefits and what reasonable trade-offs are. And there's a lot of support for a lot of these
Yeah.
changes. And I do think it's important to remember that in this conversation.
Yeah. I was reading up on those articles that you shared, and to be clear, undocumented immigrants already can't get most federal benefits, but from what I understand, the Department of Health and Human Services is walking back this old policy from like 30 years ago that listed about 31 programs as federal public benefits, and now they're broadening that definition a bit to include more programs, so it's going from 31 to 44. And Head Start is one of them, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah. And
it
go ahead.
yeah. Well, it reminds me of an article that our colleague Janet Wynn wrote, I think this week. So it it was about undocumented immigrants and how much we rely on them for Social Security because, like I said, they
They pay
often
into it and they don't
undocumented
get it back.
workers. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Like they pay taxes to help fund programs. Social Security is a big one. They get, Social Security gets billions each year from undocumented immigrants, even though they can't collect any of those benefits. And so our colleague Janet, she wrote about how um, Trump's immigration policies could threaten Social Security because right now Social Security is facing a big shortfall. It's expected to deplete its trust and by 2034 because of things like falling birth rates and our aging population. And so she reported on how deporting undocumented immigrants over the next decade could reduce the Social Security revenue and deplete the trust fund earlier than expected. But going back to what you were saying, like this rhetoric around like protecting American resources gets used a lot in political messaging and different circles, especially around immigration. And it's framed, I think, as like a common sense approach that like benefits should go to citizens. But I think when you look at the numbers and who's actually keeping some of these systems running, I think that logic starts to unravel a bit, like in the case of Social Security.
Yeah, so much
Um,
more to talk through about OBBA, enough B's. Oh God, I can't even. And the changes that are coming down the pipeline. And yeah, we would love to hear from you all what you think
yeah, let
of
us
all of
know.
this and this realignment of our social safety net. Anyway, That's it for the news. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to play half full, half empty.
All right, it is game time. Drew Jostad is here to host a round of half full, half empty. Take it away, Drew.
All right. First up, we have due to tariff uncertainty, companies have begun rethinking the forecasts that they're giving investors, sometimes withholding forward guidance, sometimes just offering a range of possible scenarios. Are you half full or half empty on this sort of different approach?
I think this was Sabri's story yesterday about companies just trying to figure out what to say when you literally have no
Right.
idea where our economic policy is going. Ah, half full or half empty on frame it again for me, Drew?
Yeah, can you say that again?
Uh, Rethinking the approach to forward guidance?
I mean, they
Hmm.
have to, right? What's the other option? That you can't. I remember several years back when there was like this big effort that companies shouldn't even be issuing quarterly guidance because
Mm.
it made the markets too reactive and that they should just avoid it altogether. And then they all just pretended like they never said that. But in terms of this particular environment, I'd say they have to. I don't know what else you would do in this space.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm half full too because you don't want to pretend that you have the answers, right? I think
Hmm.
just saying like, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's how we're preparing. Uh,
Sarah in the chat is saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Right. What's the next one, Drew?
Next up, added protein can now be found in
oh,
everything from iced tea to dog food. Are you half full or half empty on the protein product craze?
that was the conversation Amy had, I think, with an Atlantic reporter this week.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
I think I'm half empty. I don't want protein and everything. Or I think I'm just skeptical when companies try to peddle, these kind of marketing schemes and at the end of the day, I'm like, who's really profiting off of this? It's those folks and fitness influencers, and also like all of our bodies have different needs. And
mm-hmm.
and also it tastes like chalk. I'm thinking of the protein bars. I'm like not trying to eat them.
So I have a friend who's gotten into weightlifting in the last few years, and she has started talking about protein a little bit more. And um, like you said, everybody's body has different needs. And so, you know what? I'm going to say half full. Let people eat, drink what they want, and it doesn't live anywhere more so than what was it, the probiotics that are in things
Hmm.
now. Sure, why not? Eat what you
Yeah, I
want.
know.
All right, next topic. Microsoft has announced $4 billion in grants and computing services for schools, colleges, and nonprofits to use for AI education. Are you half full or half empty?
So this was
Hmm.
an interesting story. I had a conversation because I'm preparing to moderate a panel in a few weeks about AI, and in our prep conversation, it came up about how different schools are deploying AI, and
Right.
that if you remove the "oh my God, this is scary" component of it,
Hmm.
what if you let a kid sit in a classroom with a customized AI learning plan just for them for a couple of hours a day, and the teacher spends the rest of the time with them in the class
Right.
teaching social skills, teaching things like hygiene or skills that you can only get from other people. If you do let AI do the sort of nuts and bolts and mechanics of like math and reading and things like that, is that a better use of teachers' time to emphasize social learning and community values? All know that's a whole dicey thing. I
Yeah.
Look, we can't ignore these tools. So I think we all kind of have a responsibility to educate ourselves about them in order to live with them because they're not going away. So I'm going to
I
say half
know.
full for this one.
I don't know. I'm leaning towards half empty only because I'm cynical.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right. AI probably has a place in education. I just don't know what that looks like. And I just want to make sure we're not rushing to do it without really thinking it through because AI is not a neutral tool, right? And
Yeah.
I think And especially when the research is just still so early and mixed. And I know how tempting it can be to
About what it
use
does to your
something like
brain.
that. Right. Well, like, yeah, and it's, kids, I don't know, I'm not like a early childhood expert, but I imagine, like they need to struggle, right? They need to be able to really go through, like when they're learning a new skill, they need to experience that. And so I get nervous of these tools, creating a shortcut for them. And also, I don't know, there's something unsettling about letting the biggest tech companies play such a central role in deciding what AI in the classroom looks like.
Yeah, that's a
So
good
for
point. There's a
those
lot of really
reasons, mhm,
those reasons, what, half full, half empty.
I'm leaning half empty.
There's a bunch of interesting comments in the chat. People saying, Rora is empty, saying the students are the commodity. Kevin is saying AI is
Mm,
moving so fast, any class will be dated before it's done. And yeah, this idea that R. Collier says this just allows teachers to focus more on the bad students. That's an argument that it,
um,
it will open up more space for the few teachers we have to target their attention to the kids who really need it. Yeah. Um, Ben Mendes points out the internet rotted our brain as kids, TV rotted our older siblings, radio rotted our parents. Yeah, somehow we all
yeah.
survived. What's the next one, Drew?
Next up, we're opening it up for the poll.
All right, everyone in the
Let's do
chat,
it.
please weigh in. And if you don't mind, give us a little like while you're in there.
All right. So this week, Kai interviewed a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who found more and more job postings emphasizing a lack of work-life balance at the company, with one
Mm.
saying, don't even apply if you're not eager to work 70 hours a week. Are you half full or half empty on companies advertising a lack of work-life balance?
At least they're being real. I don't know.
I mean,
Hmm.
it's illegal, but okay. Um, I saw that article in the
Yeah,
journal when it came out, and
same.
there's there's a version of me that relates to it. Like I remember in my early years of journalism, people talking about the long hours and the lack of sleep and the chasing down stories and,
Right.
the absolute lack of work-life balance. And I've certainly had periods of my life where I've lived that, and I was good with it because I knew what I signed up
Yeah, me
for.
too. Yeah, it was like an
But it's
accomplish,
like,
it's a source of pride in a way.
yeah, but I mean, that's very American culture of, your work
Right.
is your life, which does all kinds of things to our society as well as our bodies and our mental health. Um, I will be stunned if the younger generation is, you know,
On
if
board.
this
No.
strategy appeals to them. I mean, maybe they're trying to recruit older workers who um, are annoyed at what they perceive as a lack of work ethic of younger generations. And I also think that, this factors into the AI conversation. It's like, well, if you're not willing to do it, we'll get a bot to do it instead.
Right.
Uh yeah, I don't know. Let's look at the
Yeah.
chat.
I'm leaning towards I'm half empty because yeah, I personally I'm not about that life, but also I don't it is like I feel like we're in this weird post-pandemic labor moment where flexibility is, has become the new standard, and it feels like employers are quietly swinging the pendulum back to pre-2020 life.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I'm a little skeptical. I'm a little nervous about that. And also
Paul
like,
says, oh, go ahead.
yeah. Well, no, when you go for it.
Paul is saying, appreciate them being honest, but dang, glad the unemployment rate is low enough to counter bad capitalism, like using workers. Mighty Unlikely says, that reality is not for a job description. It comes later if ownership and elevation was part of the equation.
Hmm.
Barbara says, I've done those hours, no more. I've rejected job offers that told me it would be like that. But we've
Mm-hmm.
got the poll results, and unsurprisingly, folks are overwhelmingly half
Aw.
empty, 79%. Just 20% half full. I'd love to know what the folks that are half full while you think. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
oh gosh, Shelly is saying, I used to work at a company that had a use 'em and lose 'em mentality, and it was a great training ground, and then you moved on. Um, Not to be a super
Mm-hmm.
downer, but I did a story several years back about a book, a woman who used to work for one of the big accounting and sort of management consulting firms. And she wrote a book about how a lot of the strategies that organizations use to optimize their workforce were like developed by testing and like scientific experiments on workforce management on enslaved populations in the American South and the Caribbean. So like that
Whoa,
concept of
that's
use people
dark.
until they burn out and then replace them, that was literally a very common strategy during slavery because they had these whole formulas worked out of exactly how much they could work people to maximize their labor before they died to get their money back
Jeez.
and replace them. So,
Oh,
yay, we've
that is
moved so
dark.
far.
Oh,
God. Yeah, sorry. Everybody enjoy your Friday. That's the end of our half full, half empty game.
all
Oh,
right.
sorry,
That's a
y'all.
wrap on this week. No, no, it's real. It's real. We'll be
Yeah.
back on Monday. In the meantime, you know how to reach us. You can email us at makemesmart@marketplace.org, or you can leave us a voicemail at 508 UB Smart.
Make Me Smart is produced magnificently by Courtney Bergseeker, and today's episode was
Truly.
engineered also wonderfully by Jake Cherry.
The team behind the YouTube live stream is Emily McCune, Jamila Huxtable, and Antoinette Brock, who are also amazing. Daisy Palacios, who's also great, is our supervising senior
Everybody's
producer.
great.
Nancy Fergali, I know, now I have to do it for everyone. Nancy Fergali
I'm
is
sorry.
executive producer, Marketplace Shows, and Joanne Griffith is our chief content officer.
And she's pretty cool, too.
They're all pretty cool, I would say.
They're all pretty cool.